Today we're diving into the darkest corners of military history to uncover weapons so terrifying, so ingenious, and so brutal that most people have never even heard of them. We're not talking about your typical swords and guns here. These are the weapons that made even hardened warriors think twice. From ancient psychological warfare to Cold War nightmares that were actually built, this list will change how you think about human ingenuity. So buckle up. Don't forget to hit subscribe and tap like. It really helps the channel grow. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And let's get into the most terrifying weapons you didn't know existed. Weapon number 1. Greek fire. Starting strong with a weapon so effective and so terrifying that its formula was lost to history. Greek fire. Invented by the Byzantine Empire around 672 AD, Greek fire was essentially medieval napalm. But here's what made it absolutely horrifying. It burned on water. Imagine you're a sailor in the 7th century. Your ship is attacked, it catches fire, and when you jump into the ocean to escape, the water itself is on fire. The Byzantines used this weapon primarily in naval warfare, launching it through bronze tubes mounted on their ships. Witnesses described it as a roaring liquid flame that couldn't be extinguished by water. In fact, trying to douse it with water often made it worse. The recipe was such a closely guarded state secret that only the Byzantine emperor and the family that manufactured it knew the formula. They succeeded so well in keeping it secret that when the Byzantine Empire fell, the knowledge died with it. To this day, historians debate its exact composition, though it likely contained petroleum, quicklime, sulfur, and naphtha. Greek fire saved Constantinople multiple times and gave the Byzantines an 800-year technological advantage. That's longer than firearms have existed. Weapon number 2. The Claw of Archimedes. Speaking of ancient naval warfare, let's talk about something that sounds straight out of science fiction, but was actually real. The Claw of Archimedes. During the siege of Syracuse in 214 BC, the brilliant mathematician Archimedes designed a series of war machines to defend his city against the Roman fleet. The most terrifying was dubbed the Ship Shaker. Ancient historians described it as a massive crane-like arm with a grappling hook that would extend over the city walls. When Roman ships came close, the claw would descend, grab the bow of the ship, and then lift it partially out of the water. The ship would dangle vertically before being dropped or smashed against rocks. The Roman historian Plutarch wrote that the Romans became so terrified of these devices that if they saw a rope or piece of wood appearing over the walls, they would flee in panic, believing another of Archimedes' machines was about to attack them. Modern engineers have actually built working replicas based on the historical descriptions, proving that this weapon was not only real, but entirely feasible with ancient technology. The siege lasted 2 years, partly because the Romans were too terrified to approach the walls. Weapon number 3. The Schwerer Gustav. Fast forward to World War II, and we find humanity's obsession with building bigger and deadlier weapons reached its logical extreme, the Schwerer Gustav. This was the largest gun ever used in combat, and I mean largest. This thing was so massive it required 500 men just to assemble it over 3 days. It traveled on railroad tracks and weighed 1,350 tons. That's heavier than the Eiffel Tower's metal framework. The numbers are almost comical. It fired shells weighing 7 tons, about the weight of an African elephant, at distances up to 30 miles. Each shell was so large a man could stand inside it. The gun barrel was big enough to drive a car through it. But here's the thing. It was actually used. During the siege of Sevastopol in 1942, the Gustav fired 48 rounds over several days, destroying a fortress, an ammunition depot buried 100 feet underground, and numerous other fortifications. Despite its devastating power, the Gustav was ridiculously impractical. It was so slow to move and set up that it could only be used in stationary siege situations. The Allies never found it, because the Germans destroyed it in 1945 to prevent its capture, but the fact that it was built at all shows how far militaries would go in pursuit of the ultimate weapon. Weapon number 4, bat bombs. Now let's talk about one of the strangest weapons ever seriously developed, the bat bomb. Yes, you heard that right. During World War II, the United States military developed an actual plan to use bats as incendiary weapons against Japan. Here's how it worked. Mexican free-tailed bats would be captured, fitted with tiny napalm incendiary devices, put into hibernation, and then dropped over Japanese cities in bomb-shaped containers. The containers would open at dawn, releasing thousands of bats that would roost in the wooden buildings common in Japanese architecture. Timer detonators would ignite the incendiaries, starting thousands of simultaneous fires across the city. And this wasn't just some crazy proposal that got laughed out of the room. The U.S. spent 2 years and $2 million developing this weapon. During testing, some armed bats escaped and set fire to a U.S. military base, including a general's car. The project was eventually canceled in favor of a more efficient incendiary weapon, the atomic bomb. But tests showed that the bat bombs actually caused more fires and more destruction than standard incendiary bombs. One military assessment concluded that it could have been devastatingly effective. The fact that this was a real military project tells you something about how creative and terrifying weapons development can get. Weapon number 5, the Scold's Bridle. Not all terrifying weapons are designed to kill. Some are designed to humiliate and inflict psychological torture. Enter the Scold's Bridle, also known as the Branks. Used primarily in Britain and Scotland from the 16th to 18th centuries, this was an iron cage that locked around a woman's head with a metal plate that pressed down on her tongue, making speech impossible. Some versions had spikes on the tongue plate that would pierce the tongue if the wearer tried to talk. It was used as punishment for troublesome women, those accused of gossiping, nagging, or simply speaking out of turn. The victim would then be paraded through town for public humiliation, sometimes chained to a post in the town square. What makes this weapon particularly terrifying isn't just the physical pain, it's the targeted psychological cruelty. It was specifically designed to silence women and was a tool of social control that sent a clear message about who had power and who didn't. While it's tempting to dismiss this as ancient history, the last recorded use was in 1824, less than 200 years ago. Devices like this remind us that weapons aren't just about combat. They're often about control and oppression. Weapon number 6, Project Pluto, the Flying Crowbar. Let's jump to the Cold War for something that sounds too insane to be real. Project Pluto, nicknamed the Flying Crowbar. In the 1960s, the United States developed a nuclear-powered cruise missile that was essentially an unshielded nuclear reactor screaming through the air at treetop level at Mach 3. And that wasn't even the worst part. This missile would fly low over enemy territory, delivering multiple nuclear warheads. But even without detonating its payload, the missile itself was a weapon. The unshielded nuclear reactor would spew deadly radiation over everything it flew over. The sonic boom from its low-altitude supersonic flight would shatter structures below, and it could theoretically stay airborne for months, circling enemy territory indefinitely. But here's the truly horrifying part. The mission profile called for it to fly randomly over the Soviet Union after delivering its warheads, spreading radiation and terror until it finally crashed, causing one final nuclear detonation from the reactor itself. The engineers actually built and successfully tested the nuclear ramjet engine. It worked perfectly. But the project was eventually canceled because even Cold War military planners realized it was too horrifying. As one scientist put it, this weapon would leave a calling card of death and destruction that would make entire regions uninhabitable. The fact that they built and tested it shows us how close we came to weaponizing the apocalypse itself. Weapon number 7, the two-co-nu, or repeating crossbow. Back to ancient times for a weapon that was so advanced, it seems like it came from another era. The two-co-nu, or Chinese repeating crossbow.
Invented during the Warring States period around 400 BC, this was essentially a semi-automatic crossbow that could fire multiple bolts in rapid succession without reloading. While European crossbows required lengthy reloading times, a skilled operator could fire up to 10 bolts in 15 seconds with the Chukonu. The weapon used a rectangular magazine on top that could hold up to 10 bolts. The operator simply worked a lever back and forth. Each cycle would load, cock, and fire automatically. What made this terrifying wasn't just the rate of fire, but the psychological impact. In an era when archers and crossbowmen were expected to shoot slowly, suddenly facing a hail of bolts must have been shocking. The weapon was sometimes loaded with poison bolts, making even minor wounds potentially fatal. The Chinese used these weapons for over 1,800 years. They were still in service during the Sino-Japanese War in the 1890s. And yet, this technology never spread to Europe during the medieval period. Imagine how different European warfare would have been if knights faced semi-automatic crossbows. Weapon number 8, the Stone of Folly operation, also known as Trepanation. From ancient times through the medieval period, surgeons would drill or scrape holes into living patients' skulls, supposedly to cure everything from madness to migraines to demonic possession by releasing evil spirits or the Stone of Folly. Archaeological evidence shows this procedure was performed as far back as 6500 BC, and shockingly, many patients survived. We know this because their skulls show healing around the holes. But here's where it gets dark. This technique was weaponized. There are historical accounts of it being used as punishment or torture, particularly during the Inquisition. The threat of having your skull opened while conscious, because anesthesia didn't exist, was a terrifying form of psychological warfare. Even more disturbing, the procedure continued well into the 1700s, with doctors traveling from town to town offering to remove the Stone of Folly, often in public spectacles. It's a reminder that the line between medicine and torture has sometimes been horrifyingly thin. So there you have it, 8 terrifying weapons from across human history that you probably never learned about in school. From Greek fire that burned on water to bat bombs and nuclear-powered missiles, humans have shown remarkable creativity in finding ways to harm each other. Some of these weapons were devastatingly effective. Others were too terrifying even for war. And some blurred the line between warfare and torture. What perhaps most striking is that these weapons span over 2,000 years of history, yet they all share one thing. They were designed not just to defeat enemies, but to inspire terror. What do you think was the most terrifying weapon on this list? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.